Well, I think we all know that when we're polarized, nothing moves forward. Where we've been fighting the battle for 5 or 50 or 500 years, it probably has polarities involved rather than a right or wrong. Just for example, helping a school realize that if you want to support student needs, you've got to support the adults. Our real goal is to have effective teachers in every classroom so that every student succeeds, right? It's not really about either the students or the teachers. We have to have both of those things going, or the building can't move every student forward. And so when you're looking at polarities, you've got an interdependency where both sides hold part of the truth. They're not complete unless you've got the other. It isn't just that both sides are right, it's that they're incomplete.
Welcome to The Teaming Edge, a show about education leaders and the actions they take to support team and school performance. In today's show, Dr. Jane Kise, author and consultant, shares her insights on how leaders can be more intentional, systemic, and practical in their work. Dr. Jane Kise is the founder of Differentiated Coaching Associates and the author of nearly 30 books ranging from typology, coaching, leadership, polarity, and many other topics as well. Dr. Kise received her undergraduate in English and business. She went on to get her MBA in finance and her doctorate in education leadership. Currently, Jane is a consultant that continues to work on both sides. That is, the corporate side and the education side, specializing in instructional coaching, leadership development, team effectiveness, differentiated instruction, to name a few. Her consulting work has afforded her to work with clients around the world. Jane had an unexpected transition from business to education when she was invited and volunteered at a career day for 8th graders.
I was invited into a school, and we did a career day for 8th graders, and it went okay with half of the students, and the other half, the teachers didn't know enough about what we were doing to really back us up. And I truly ran into the school assistant principal who'd been in charge of the day, and she said, "It should have gone better. I'm moving to a principalship. As soon as I've got my feet on the ground, I'm going to have you in, and we're going to do it right." And that led to a 15-year partnership with Beth Russell, who's my co-author on 2 education books. We worked together in 3 schools, and that gave me the laboratory before instructional coaching was really a thing, to take what I knew from the business world, where I'd been doing that sort of coaching as a consultant, and bring it over to education.
And Jane's work has been a very influential part of my thinking as a consultant. In fact, I sit here at my desk with 5 of her books stacked up in the corner, and I lean into these for knowledge, perspective, and inspiration. As a consultant, Jane combines solutions that might include polarity thinking tools, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and personality type theory as popularized through the MBTI. I have a particular fascination with MBTI, also known as Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Personality Inventory. Many of the listeners may probably have taken this assessment or something similar that will provide you with a specific type out of 16 personality types, such as INFJ or ENTP, and so on. This work began with Carl Jung. Jung originally followed the work of Sigmund Freud before breaking away and creating his own psychological theory he termed as analytical psychology, but today it's better known as Jungian psychology, and it is certainly too vast to discuss here. However, most of us are likely somewhat familiar with Jung's personality type based on what he called attitudes and functions, which are opposing ways of interacting with one's environment. The attitudes relate to introversion and extroversion, while the functions relate to the opposing pair of thinking and feeling, and the other opposing pair of sensing and intuition. So this results in 8 personality types: introverted thinking and extroverted thinking, introverted and extroverted feeling, introverted and extroverted sensing, and finally, introverted and extroverted intuition. I would argue that everyone has all these functions, but we definitely have a tendency to use one above the other. I would go on to say that an adult with high levels of social emotional intelligence, not coincidentally, has also more of a balance of these personality types. So, for example, an ineffective team leader might double down and overemphasize one particular function type, whereas a more effective team leader would leverage multiple personality types in order to have a more sophisticated response to the team's needs, problem solving, and creative innovation. Let's listen in as Jane shares her take on personality types.
As the more I worked with it, I came to realize that you can either believe that there are 8 billion individuals in the world, which is true, or you can give into the fact that the human brain looks for patterns. And if we don't control how we look for patterns, as in be mindful about it, we start stereotyping people. Actually, when I came over to education, I was rather astounded at how much teachers are stereotyped, that there's the resistant ones, that there's the deadwood on your staff, that there's the stars. And what I knew from the world of type is that leaders tend to meet the needs of people that are most like them in terms of this personality type theory. And they see those who aren't like them as resistant when actually they're just not meeting their needs. And personality type is all about how we perceive the world. Everybody's familiar and recognizes when people are more big picture oriented or more detail oriented. That's how we perceive the world. And how we make decisions. Are we more logical or value centered? And when you combine those two ways of being with whether we're more energized by the external or the internal world, you get these 16 patterns, 16 personality types. And rather than thinking of them as a box, Carl Jung was using them to actually identify pathways to maturity. And so it's not that you're stuck on this path or stuck in this box. It's that these patterns will give you guidance in how you can make the most of who you are. And if we're doing it right, then we're not stereotyping. We aren't saying, oh, that person can't see the forest for the trees. We're saying, oh, this person's more of a tree person. And with a little scaffolding, we can help them use the forest as needed.
Now, I know you also have a colleague who has been doing some similar work, Dr. Dario Nard, UCLA professor who has been doing brain research in this area as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I guess he's helped to solidify this idea and those patterns with some pretty hard data.
Absolutely. If you take two random individuals, they'll have about a third of their brain activity in common. You know, I'd be happy to answer emails from anybody who wants to know more about this. Dario and I are really good friends and colleagues, and I'm certified in his programs. But if you take two people of the same type, that 30% brain activity in common goes up to 50 to 80% at a statistically significant level. So this is real. It's malleable. Well, we do know people who haven't matured and stay stuck in their ways as they were when they were kids, right? But the mature person does learn to move out of this box. The initial way we're wired, we do have these tendencies, and they matter.
That's right. They do matter. I appreciate you making yourself available to the listeners. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to Dr. Jane Kise. So with this idea of Jungian psychology and then the framework of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI, you tell me your thoughts on this, but it seems that it's a fun assessment to identify some letters, and so you can tell people who you are, rather than a growth tool to understand where you have some natural tendencies and how you can double down on those and create a weakness in the way that they're being used. So there's a balance in how you show up and how you use these tendencies. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how it's perceived and how people may use that to continue their development.
I joke sometimes that I used to be head of the International Type Association, so if I don't know what my best friends do, I used to teach the certification program, so I've drunk the Kool-Aid on this. But maybe Beth put it best in one of the workshops we did together. She asked the room, how many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs? And probably 80% of the hands went up. And she said, how many of you remember your 4-letter code? And maybe 10 hands stayed up. And then she said, how many of you used it in a deep way so that you saw the impact on how you led or how you collaborated or how you taught? And just 1 or 2 hands stayed up. And then she asked for the impact. And I can tell you that at The second school we worked at together, we took the failure rate on major projects for students from 30% down to 0 by the teachers having a new understanding through personality type of how those students worked.
Wow, that's incredible.
I can tell you that 90% of the kids in our alternative school are just 4 personality types. Since type has nothing to do with intelligence, that means that our school system has another invisible bias that puts these kids at risk. And those are the kinds of kids that started turning in their big projects when the teachers understood them better.
How far do you zoom out when you're trying to identify and differentiate the support that you're providing students?
Well, just take our world of distance learning right now. Every student needs to stay energized in that environment. And about half of our population is energized through action and interaction, and the other half through solitude and reflection. And you think about distance learning, and actually both can be at risk if we do it too one-sided. I think of the battles sometimes being fought at home because the adults have been told, make a quiet place for your child to study, or make sure that they're listening and staying focused, when actually an extroverted child might be better off standing at a window with a wet erase marker and taking all their notes there while they're watching the screen sitting on the windowsill, so that they can kick their energy out, moving a little bit and write in bigger letters and all those kinds of things. And the introverted students might need breaks in that sort of environment where they can just listen for, the average adult can only listen for about 8 or 9 minutes without a break. So taking that same sort of break for the introverted students to think about what they've heard and get ready to ask a question and not be asked too quickly. So we can teach that to the teachers. I mean, we already know about wait time as a differentiation strategy. We can put it into terms of extroversion and introversion. And then teachers start to say, oh, I was giving wait time, but I certainly wasn't counting to 5. 5 is such a long time. You could try it here during the podcast and see how long it is. To your original question on how far do you go, I want to know how much time a school has. Do they want a neutral framework that they can use to tie professional development together? Because in all honesty, we can use type to decrease stress because the patterns and what stresses people are different. We can use it for instruction because type is all about, remember I said it was about information. And what else is instruction but information? It's about assessment. It's about classroom management. It's about collaborative teams. It's about leadership development. It's even how you pack your suitcase for a trip. It's amazing what the correlations are between personality type and how we actually go about deciding what we're going to take on a trip.
So it sounds like you use this as an opportunity to provide a framework to just have a new, fresh perspective on best practices that they know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine a team that has some diversity in terms of their types would better approach how to implement this in the classroom. One person who's just seeing things from a very logical perspective and can't imagine any value in how students feel about the subject would not consider strategies for giving them the opportunity to express it in that new way. But if you're with a team member that sees things in terms of values and not just how they think, that could really provide a more balanced approach to planning a lesson.
It absolutely does. And there's 2 things. This is about constructive use of differences. So my first goal is always getting people to realize how much value there is in the other side and that we need both sides. On logic and values, almost no decisions can be made without both. And that's a real key concept here because this is not an either or. We have a preference for one, and then we sort of scramble for the rest of our lives to get enough tools to work with the other so that we can make good decisions. And so on a team, when you realize that, wow, that person's my opposite, that's my best resource. And you can take something to that team member and say, how would this sit with students who don't think like me? And that team member becomes a resource. So, so that piece is really key. At the principal level, you don't have to know the type of every teacher because you've got quite a variety in the building, and you're probably missing communicating well with some of them who just don't think like you. And the same with the teacher. Chances are you've got every personality type in your classroom, or just about. So it's not as crucial to know every type of every child as it is to know that you've got to change things up because not every child learns like you. We group the personality types into 4 different ways of learning, and school actually requires all 4. One of the ways differentiation through learning styles has gone wrong is saying always meet the needs of the child, whereas certain things have to be delivered through certain styles. You cannot become a scientist without hands-on learning, for example. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
And so I'm a big picture person, John, and I will never forget when I learned how useless that was in the actual chemistry laboratory. I was a freshman in college taking freshman chem, and we had to do 8 science laboratory technique experiments perfectly. And I flunked titration, where you're adding drop by drop to a formula 22 times.
Yeah, you can't intuit your way through a titration.
No, it's actually, I'm an intuitive, and it's a very sensing, detail-oriented thing. If someone had scaffolded me by saying, count the drops out loud, I would have passed it probably on the 3rd time. When I'm trying to do something that detailed, my mind wanders. And so I kept losing count, and my solution kept turning purple. And so that's what we try to get to teachers to understand, that what you're trying to do is help a student understand, oh, this is out of my style. I'm not stupid. I need a different strategy. And once I figured out count out loud, I passed titration right away. And that's what we're trying to do. I hope that example makes sense to you.
Well, that sure does. And I think it leads to my next question. So you've written extensively on MBTI. It's in several of your books, but your flagship book, Differentiated Coaching, is an integration of both instructional coaching and type psychology.
Mm-hmm.
You've alluded to this. Tell me about how differentiated coaching as a framework is different from other coaching frameworks.
Sure. It starts with the premise that there are no resistant teachers, but only teachers whose needs haven't been met. And I truly believe this. I have not yet coached a teacher where when they got information in the way that makes sense to them, they didn't say, oh my gosh, I do need to change my classroom. So that's the opening premise. And if we do it well for teachers, if we truly, as coaches, change up what we're doing so that the teacher who has to do the hard work of changing gets things in their style so that their informational needs are met, then we're modeling for them how to do it for students. And so that piece of it is simply crucial to coaching. If you think about taking in information and making decisions, the 2 basic ways of doing each, the big picture and the details, the logic and the values, you put those together and you've got 4 coaching styles. So I work with coaches on helping them recognize their home style. I, for example, am coach as collegial mentor. And if you're familiar with type, it's intuition, the big picture, combined with feeling, using values. And a lot of coaching literature is written from this viewpoint. An amazing number of instructional coaches are this personality type. I've been in districts where 100% of the literacy coaches are intuitive feelers, collegial mentor coaches. Cognitive coaching really comes from this value set. I happen to be married to my total opposite. He was a physical education teacher. I mean, it almost sounds like a joke, right? The FIAD teacher marries the English teacher. But if you try cognitive coaching on him, he's going to look at you and say, if I had a good idea, I'd be using it. I thought you were here to help. I call his type coach's useful resource. They're very detail-oriented. They're very logical. If you've got something that works, hand it over. They will try it. They will try it to the best of their ability. And if it works, they will not only be back for more, but they will change that up 6 ways from Tuesday, making it better than you ever knew it could be. And then actually innovate from there. So they innovate from experience. They don't innovate from something they haven't done. And that's a crucial difference when you're coaching.
Well, as another NF, I can relate to that. So, Jane, it makes me think, I really love how you honor a teacher and help change that perception that a lot of people have about the quote unquote resistant teacher. There's no resistant teachers. There's just teachers who have not had their needs supported yet. Makes me think of something I heard with coactive coaching is everyone's naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. Mm-hmm. So you come to the coaching session with that understanding, and it makes things much more productive.
It changes your whole reaction. If I don't know the personality type of the person I'm talking with, there's a few basic things I can look for, or simply ask a question and see what happens. If the teacher starts asking me a whole lot of questions that tend toward the theoretical level to the point where I'm almost starting to feel like they're challenging me, my reaction is, they're not only big picture, but they're really logical. okay, so they're not attacking me. They're not attacking my theories. They just want a good debate so that they understand how what I'm bringing fits with what they already know, what they've already researched. And that's a very different thing from thinking this teacher is being belligerent or attacking or not interested. And it makes for great discussions. And usually at the end, there's a, okay, let's try it from the teacher, or can we try it with these modifications? And again, these are patterns. We all learn from our mentors, we all from our parents, from our careers. And yet there's these core things that really come out when we were asked to do the hard work of changing. We like changing a classroom practice, which if your classroom's under control and your kids in your classroom are doing as well as anybody else in the building, change is really frightening. What is going to happen? Is it going to get better? How do I know? But, the opposite of the coaches experts who want that debate and then they're ready to try it are the coaches encouraging sage. Those are the teachers where I spend the most time in the classroom. They need me there to encourage them because nothing goes right the first time, right? When you try a new strategy, you're not familiar with it. The students aren't familiar with it. And these teachers take it all so personally. And so I'm there to point out what's going right, even as they're so concerned that they're somehow experimenting on their children and they should go back to what they used to do. And, I'll often say, concentrate on the child you're most worried about. And let's see what happens as you use this strategy with them. And as they see things starting to work, that's where their motivation comes from to deal with the hard work of change. But I often have to be there. They're not needy. That's just how they learn.
And it's not right or wrong. It's a stance you understand you need to take and a coaching role you need to hold in order to best meet them as a learner at that moment.
Mm-hmm. And they love co-planning, just so that they can get all their questions answered as they're putting the plan together. Whereas usually teachers like you and me want to get the plan quite a ways down the pike before they have the coach come in so that they know where they were going, and then we'll take that advice. So very different approach.
Now, you've had a lot of experience. You've supported a lot of teachers, a lot of leaders over the years, and I know it's not always easy. So what are some of the greatest challenges that you faced as an advocate, a supporter of educators?
I think one of the biggest ones is still helping a school realize that if you want to support student needs, you've got to support the adults. I can remember even in the peer reviews on my book on professional learning communities, one of the reviewers said, well, this would be a waste of time to invest in all this adult learning. We need to focus on the students. Convincing people that those are interdependent, that the collaborative teams don't happen by magic, that when people have been in silos teaching on their own, it doesn't naturally happen, bringing them together to have them collaborate. And even if they do, I mentioned that all literacy coaches are often the same type. Have you noticed that there's a difference between a math department and an English department as to who's in it? Or maybe that the science teachers are a little bit different from the social studies teachers? And so you can have a group that's unanimous who have a bias that can impact students, because not all the students in our public schools will be the types of the teachers then.
That has been a major challenge for me as well, is balancing that focus on the student, but also respecting the needs of the adult learner. So this polarity leads me to this other work that you've done, especially the release of your book, Unleashing the Power of Differences, this concept of polarity thinking. And it seems to me that polarity thinking is a systems approach to working through polarizing issues, like the one we just talked about with the teacher and the student. Teacher autonomy and collaboration is another one. Performance assessments and standardized assessments. It goes on and on. So walk us through this concept, this idea of how powerful polarity thinking is.
Well, I think we all know that when we're polarized, nothing moves forward. And any issue where we've been fighting the battle for 5 or 50 or 500 years probably has polarities involved rather than a right or wrong. Just for example, meeting the needs of the adults and the students that we were just talking about, our real goal is to have effective teachers in every classroom so that every student succeeds, right? It's not really about either the students or the teachers. We have to have both of those things going, or the building can't move every student forward. And so when you're looking at polarities, you've got an interdependency where both sides hold part of the truth. They're not complete unless you've got the other. It isn't just that both sides are right. It's that they're incomplete. And so many of the battles that we fight actually have polarities. Just think about whole language versus phonics. Do we really think that a child who's only given phonics is going to develop that love of reading that's going to propel them to truly incorporate reading into life, as they will need to be a lifelong learner? And if we only do whole language without giving some of the mechanics that help you move faster on a reading path so it's more enjoyable, that we're going to create successful readers, it's actually a both and, which balanced literacy shows, but we're still fighting that battle as to how much and for how long and for which students. And that's one where I can tell you that there's a personality type difference on who favors which one of the strategies. So you've got this layering of, we think we're right. Our belief is actually tied to how we learn, and we need to hear the other side. And that's what polarity thinking helps us do.
So educators, from what I've seen, they tend to double down on one of the poles, which in fact takes them further and further away from the greater purpose that we're seeking. So it seems that polarity thinking really increases the capacity to think in a more comprehensive way around a topic.
It does. We can take it all the way to a validated assessment where we know whether one pole or the other is being favored in a situation. And I can give just a couple of quick examples. We were working on the knowledge students need and teaching students to be independent learners with more of the creativity side of things. And the teachers, in this case, they were middle school teachers. They helped me create the assessment. And what came back from the students was that they really felt that they were developing the competencies of the discipline, and they could get an A in the class without having to work very hard. This was a school that had honors classes, and it was the kids in the honors classes that especially said, we can get away with murder. We don't really have to work that hard. And the teachers thought that they were doing high-level assignments, and the students knew they weren't, that the balance wasn't right. And I've never had teachers so quick to sign up for coaching as I did when they saw the results of the survey that they'd written, because it didn't just criticize them. It showed the things they were doing well, and it also showed that they were favoring that pool. If you think of the content of the discipline versus actually doing the work of the discipline, in science, actually furthering scientific knowledge, even if somebody else knows it, the students don't know it yet. And so they're doing that hypothesizing and not just memorizing laws of motion, but figuring it out for themselves.
I don't know if you've come across Parker Palmer's work.
Parker Palmer, writer, speaker, founder, and senior partner emeritus of the Center for Courage and Renewal, wrote about 6 paradoxes in his book, The Courage to Teach.
And Parker Palmer definitely has had connections to the polarity thinking community that a gentleman named Barry Johnson founded.
Well, that makes sense now. It comes full circle.
Yes.
So in your latest book, Jane, Holistic Leadership, Thriving Schools, 12 Lenses to Balance Priorities and Serve the Whole Student, I see, when I looked at this, an integration of several ideas from earlier books. You've got the leadership lenses, emotional intelligence, typology, polarity. Oh my gosh. How did this book come about for you?
It actually came first in a corporate form called Intentional Leadership. I was asked to write a book on leadership and walked round and around thinking, what isn't out there? There's so many books on leadership. And I ran across a study on why leadership development programs don't work. And so as I was writing Intentional Leadership, I was very intentional about making sure I didn't fall into the traps that have been identified through research. And if I had to summarize them, you can't learn leadership in an abstract way. You can't go off to a program and study leadership. You can't learn it from case studies that aren't integrally connected with the work you're doing, the site you're doing it in, how you are wired, and that challenges your own mindset. So holistic leadership uses personality type, so that, for example, if I'm in a leadership position, I realize that I am a values-driven decision maker, that I don't always think in terms of precedence, if then, who might have a different agenda than me. It's really easy for me to ignore the politics of a situation, for example. And so when I'm in a leadership position, I need that logic balance, whether I do it through protocols or think pieces or find somebody to have my back, which I did when I was head of a volunteer board. I actually asked one of the board of directors, tell me when I'm not seeing this clearly. And he did. He'd call me and say, have you thought about this? Which was great. So there's personality type to help us see our blind spots. There's emotional intelligence, because what we know is about 30% of your leadership capacity comes from your intelligence, just IQ. The other 70% differentiation between a good leader and a leader who's not doing well is emotional intelligence. It is crucial. So we add that in. Then there's the 12 lenses of leadership, and these are 12 polarities. It's things like reality and vision. A leader is in charge of getting people that vision that leads to collective teacher efficacy, that everybody's going, oh my gosh, if we work together, we can accomplish this. And yet that has to be balanced by reality. How much time do we have? What are the resources? What else is on our plate? What else is happening in our community? If we shoot for the goals of fall 2019 without taking into account the situation of fall 2020, we haven't accounted for reality and we're going to fall flat. Doesn't mean we give up on our goals. It means we have to go through this polarity of reality and vision and figure out the right action steps for this moment. And then we have to measure how we're growing as a leader. And SMART goals won't do it. SMART goals will not tell you whether you're being more empathetic or whether you have actually gotten teachers to trust each other more. Not even a survey will do that. So we work really hard with leaders on helping them suss out, how will I know? How will I know that teachers trust me more? How will I know that I'm actually hearing the drumbeat of the school and those sorts of pieces? Leadership development has to be situated in their work. So when I go into a school to work on this, I want to know what else is going on. One of the schools I was in last year, we just worked on the outcomes and people lens, this whole idea of we need to hold teachers accountable and we need to build a team. We need to build relationships with students and we need academic success with students. Those are all in the outcomes and people lens. So we situated it in their initiatives and their work, which is another key piece of leadership. You put all that together and boil it down to the right goal for your next step in leadership and figure out your priorities for it, which I do through a sorting of the values that leaders with different personality preferences see as most crucial to leadership, which in fact don't have the same merit in every situation. And we get that all into one sheet of paper that shows you the priorities you picked and all the lenses and the EQ components and your personality type. And then we can have the conversation around, are you thinking about this the right way in this situation with these people you're leading, with who you are? And when we get down to your top priorities, how do you know these are so important? Why is it so important? And how will you know you're making progress? So it becomes a real-time strategic plan for leadership development, not some SMART goals where you're waiting for data to come in, but something you can look at every week and say, am I doing it?
It is a strategic plan. And I'll also say that when I went through the book, I felt like I had you beside me as a leadership coach. I identified a developmental focus. I narrowed down a few leadership priorities. I aligned those to the leadership lenses and narrowed down further, explored the emotional intelligence skills, and helped use those to really identify what is my primary goal for my own leadership development. And then went to the appropriate chapter that focused on that leadership lens and got the actual steps I can take to move forward in developing in that area. It really is like having Jane Kise right next to you, coaching you along.
Well, thank you. I tried to take everything that I'd learned in those coaching situations and get it into a form that could be spread further than what I can do. And yes, there's, like in the reality and vision chapter, there's 5 practical tips if it's hard for you to get everyone excited around a vision. And if you're a big picture vision person, 5 steps to help you make sure you're grounded in the reality of the situation and not making assumptions. So the book does come down to that practical level. One of the things I love about using it is I use it in the doctoral leadership course I teach every year. As the students get closer and closer to their final project, which is their real-time strategic plan in their current leadership situation, they get more and more introspective on, oh, shoot, this really is a problem. Or, oh my gosh, how is it that I got this far without realizing it's so important to do whatever it is? It's just fascinating as they realize that not all their assumptions, but what they absolutely thought was crucial to how the world works is only half the picture.
We're living in a different world today. The pandemic has brought about major changes in education. We're also in a climate of major social justice movements. And in this book, I quote you, you said, leaders are often wary of the unknown, and it is indeed important to provide your staff and school with stability. but it is just as important to take into account the possibility of the unforeseen as you plan. So, what advice would you give a leader navigating these uncertain times?
Well, we want to remember that some of our biggest fears come from uncertainty. If you have never looked at David Rock's SCARF model.
David Rock is the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute and has been working in leadership development and executive coaching and coined the term neuro leadership. Rock published the foundational paper on the SCARF model. Let's listen in as Jane explains the SCARF model.
SCARF stands for our status being threatened. C stands for certainty. A stands for the autonomy we all need. R stands for those relationships that humans are social beings. We're wired to connect. And the F is for fairness. Are things being seen as unfair? And you think about the pandemic, and our fears come from all 5 of those. But as far as the certainty, one of the things I've been working on with leaders and with whatever group I'm with is to capture how much actually is predictable no matter what's going on. Because it's better to say, well, we don't know A, but what we do know is B, C, and D. You can ground people in that certainty. So, for example, I was coaching a superintendent, and he made sure everyone knew that one of the certainties is we need a plan for if we're wide open, every student can be in the building, if we are doing blended learning, or if we're fully virtual. That's a certainty that we need all 3 plans, because we may be able to open and then have to go back. And so it was a certainty that they needed all 3 plans. Therefore, use the certainty of what can you do that will work no matter how instruction ends up being delivered. Let's concentrate on that rather than saying, well, nothing's predictable, so how can we plan? I'm actually working on a new book. It's called Doable Differentiation. And I was finishing it up and then revising it as I was teaching my whole doctoral course virtually. And thinking, well, this is great because I can put in notes on what has to change in differentiation when instruction is virtual. And the truth is, so much of it is the same. We tend to think, oh my gosh, nothing will work. And the truth is, a ton of it will work with just a little bit of switch up. So concentrating on those predictable pieces that we can count on then actually leads to more possibilities. And that's what we've been trying to get at. It's one of the core lenses in the book.
Jane's book, released after this recording, Doable Differentiation, 12 Strategies to Meet the Needs of All Learners, is available, and she's currently working on another book with Ann Holm titled Educator Bandwidth, How to Reclaim Your Energy, Passion, and Time.
A meta-analysis of various influences on student achievement has shown that collective efficacy can have a significant impact on student learning. What must leaders understand as they strive to foster collective efficacy among the teams they support?
One of the things we need to realize is how social people really are to get the team going. When people are truly concerned about whether favorites are being played, whether they're being perceived as competent. And so the first thing is that the leader has to make sure they've created that family atmosphere where everyone knows that there is unconditional respect no matter what goes on, and that they can get the support they need. Without that, you can't take risk. No one's going to take a risk if they think they're going to be in trouble for it. So that's one, is that you've got to be able to create that family atmosphere of acceptance, even as we're driving toward outcomes. And that'll give you the trust that you need. The second thing is this vision, this piece that gets people out of bed in the morning saying, if I come to work going toward this vision that's been created, I will actually be able to make these things happen. That there's a reason to get out of bed in the morning, that they actually believe that if we work together, this can happen. That's efficacy, believing that what you're doing is going to have that kind of impact. And I think it's a whole lot easier when people understand each other, that there's clarity around what we're trying to do, and there's understanding that we can get there in different ways, which is how I use personality type, but there are some other things to do. So it doesn't just happen overnight, getting that collective efficacy going. And it's truly got these 2 big tensions in play: the outcomes in people of we do want to set audacious goals and hold people accountable. And yet we've got to have that vision that really fires them up, that takes into account the reality that they're facing. There's a third, being clear about what we're expecting of them. There's a quote in Holistic Leadership. I interviewed Jennifer Abrams, who does a lot with hard conversations.
Many of you may know of Jennifer Abrams, who is an international educational and communication consultant who has written Having Hard Conversations, Swimming in the Deep End, and Stretching Your Learning Edges.
And she talks about how often she'll go in to a building and the leaders are upset that the teachers aren't following through on things. And she finds out that half the teachers in the building were hired since they ever did any professional development on what they're being asked to do. And the teachers have no clue. It hasn't been reinforced. There's no clarity around how you do these things. And you can't hold people accountable if you haven't been clear.
Yeah, so a common purpose, clarity. It sounds like there's a lot of emotional intelligence that everyone on the team needs to work on. That would be part of a leader being the lead learner and exercising their own emotional intelligence and fostering that with the team. And that, in fact, would lead to collective efficacy.
Yes, and there has to be a bit of vulnerability on the part of the leader. That ability to say, well, that didn't go as I planned. And it doesn't mean you're airing your dirty laundry. It's much more of, like you said, the top learner in the building, that often it takes more than one iteration to get it right. I know I'm doing things right as a coach when someone will come to the team and say, here's how I did it. Who's got a better idea? Because I only had about half the class with me. And then I know that trust is there, the collective efficacy is there, because that teacher believes there's a way to do it better and wants the collaboration to get it there.
So I see a common theme in your work, balance of accountability and hard data, as well as teacher growth and building trust. I've also heard you refer to these as male and female archetypes. Could you elaborate on the archetypal themes that are in some of your work?
There is this idea of the masculine and feminine, and we're not talking about a stereotype. Maybe the best way to talk about it is there was a study done a few years ago, and they asked people around the world to identify characteristics that they felt good leaders had.
So here, Jane is referring to the Athena Doctrine, which was a book published in 2013 based on a survey of 64,000 women and men in 13 countries to classify 125 human traits.
And there was pretty strong evidence of several characteristics that people expect in leaders. They asked which ones they connect with males and which ones they connect with females. And around the world, there was pretty much agreement on which ones were more male and which ones were more female. So that's an archetypal understanding, even though people of any gender could display those characteristics. What was really interesting was when people were asked, what are the top 10 things we want in leaders? 8 out of the 10 were female characteristics.
Such as expressive, plans for future, reasonable, loyal, flexible, patient, intuitive, and collaborative, with the other 2 being more masculine, which were decisive and resilient.
And many of the things that have traditionally been associated with leadership, maybe not so much in education, which is traditionally a caring, feminine profession, and not just feminine as to who goes into it, but because of its mission. It's a service-driven mission in our K-12 schools. So you get this overtone of the feminine, but it wasn't looking for things like that top-down swim with the sharks leader that's still often held up there as the way to lead.
So it's yet another polarity.
Absolutely.
So Jane, what is a leadership tip, a protocol, or an action you could offer listeners to implement now in order to best provide differentiated support to their teachers and the teams that they support?
I would pick one of the things we've talked about and take some time for reflection, which is an absolute must of leadership development, and do one of those fearless self-inventories. Which side do you really favor? Let's look at outcomes in people, for example, or let's look at student academic achievement and student social and emotional learning, and which is also an interdependency. Which side do you favor? And how does that come out in your day-to-day interactions, your communications, the professional development you do, what you're tracking? We only pay attention to what we're measuring. So if we don't have measures in place on the other side, then we're probably not paying enough attention to it. Find one thing and figure out where you're at. And maybe the easiest way to do it is to sit down with someone who's on the other side, that you've often had those discussions where the other person's going, but you're not thinking about blank. That person may be your best resource in figuring out how to bring the needed balance to the situation you're in right now.
That is fantastic. I love the phrase fearless inventory. It sounds very Brene Brownish.
The best leaders keep learning, and they're intentional about it.
Jane, I couldn't agree more. I think the best leaders are lead learners. So thank you for sharing that. So as we transition out, tell me, where can the listeners find you?
Probably the best site is janekise.com. My last name spelled Kise. So through that, you can see descriptions of the main books for educators and a little bit about what I do, even catch my TED Talk on Carl Jung and mathematics instruction. And I'd love to hear from you through the contact page there.
Jane, thank you so much. I appreciate you being on The Teaming Edge.
Thank you. Delight to talk to someone else who is trying to help educators meet the needs of our diverse students.
And that was my talk with Dr. Jane Kise. Don't forget to head over to the teamingedge.com website to get access to free tools such as the Collective Efficacy Assessment and the Collaborative Learning Team Assessment, as well as learn more about my services. Go to theteamingedge.com or johnwilliscoaching.com to get your free resources now. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember, your leadership actions make a difference. What are you committed to this week? I'm John Willis, and you've been listening to The Teaming Edge.